Your story, our station.
If you've ever felt trapped in that endless top 40 loop, you know the feeling. Same songs, same sounds, same safe choices. Like the world hit repeat and lost the button to try something new. Today, I want to introduce you to a crew that's built to do the exact opposite. Change the station entirely. Bullet End Flight is based right in the heart of the 505, Albuquerque, where the green chili runs hot and the creative energy somehow runs even hotter. And when I say Bullet End Flight, I'm not talking about one single project or one single vibe. Think of it more like a parent company to a whole family of artistic misfits. People who don't fit neatly into the usual boxes, and honestly, don't want to. At the center of everything is a mission that's pretty simple to say, but not always easy to pull off. Elevate the voices that usually get talked over. The artists who get labeled too niche, or too different, or that weird one, too Albuquerque. Whatever that's supposed to mean. If you've ever heard something like that about your work, this is your invitation to pull up a chair. Because that's not a deal breaker here. That's the whole point. Bullet End Flight is built around inclusivity, creative community building, and giving underrepresented artists the megaphone they deserve. Not as a trend, not as a marketing angle, but as the core identity. It's a response to a creative world that can feel gated, filtered, and overly polished, where the most interesting voices get told to tone it down so they can be easier to sell. And here's where it gets fun. Bullet End Flight doesn't believe in staying in one lane. Because why would you? Why drive a sedan when you could take a spaceship? The whole approach is more like, what does human expression look like across every format? And then going after all of it. Let's start with music, because that's a major part of the DNA. The mindset here isn't pick a genre and stay in it. It's more like, what's the vibe and does it hit? That can mean the spiritual charge of gospel, the late-night pulse of house music, the smooth storytelling and emotion of R&B, or even that classic country charm where life falls apart but somehow the drink is still cold. It's not about fitting into a category. It's about making something that feels alive. But it doesn't stop at music. There's a strong dedication to the spoken word too. Podcasts that get into the real stuff, not just surface-level chatter, and poetry that doesn't play nice. The kind that lands heavy, the kind that says what people avoid saying, the kind that reminds you words can still be dangerous in the best way. Then there's film and TV writing. Getting into scripts that actually have a heartbeat. Not another recycled reboot of a reboot. Not something designed by committee to offend the fewest people possible. The focus is on stories with soul. Stories with perspective. Stories that sound like they came from real lives, in real places, with real edges. And of course, the stage. Because there is nothing like live performance. It's unpredictable, it's electric, and yeah, anything can happen. And usually does. The stage is where art stops being an idea and becomes a moment, right in front of people who can feel it in real time. So why would an artist want to plug into something like this? Because being a starving artist has been romanticized for way too long, and it doesn't need to be the default. And being a lonely artist, trying to build everything by yourself, with no village, no network, no support, That's even worse. Bullet and Flight is about building that village on purpose. The goal is to take the talent that's been brewing in the Southwest, often overlooked, often underestimated, and project it outward. Not in a please notice us kind of way, but in a we're already here, and we're bringing the whole sound with us kind of way. Bullet and Flight positions itself as a launch pad, a safety net, and the hype you didn't realize you were missing. And let's be honest, a lot of people are tired of gatekeepers. Tired of needing permission. Tired of feeling like they have to sand down everything interesting about their work to be taken seriously. If that's you, this is a space that's built for finding your tribe. People who want loud, weird, real art, and who aren't afraid to make it together. If you want to get in the mix, Deombase is https://just-dominic. And if you want the visuals, you can find the YouTube channel at @JustDominicMusic. Bullet and Flight Music, LLC is the company behind it all. And the invitation is open. Check out what's being built, listen to what's coming out, and if you're ready to change the station, this is a good place to start.
Well, the times they are a-changing fast. Some old truths just built to last. We're the Christ Following Network on Bullet and Flight Radio. Yeah, the Christ Following Network on Bullet and Flight Radio. Christ Following Network on Bullet and Flight Radio.
Welcome back to Bullet and Flight Radio. Your story, our station. Today we're stepping into a conversation that might challenge the way you've been trained to define the word freedom. Not the slogan version of freedom. Not the bumper sticker version. I'm talking about the kind of freedom that reaches into your nervous system, your identity, your soul, and asks a simple question that most of us avoid. Are you actually free, or are you just unrestrained?
Because in the modern West, freedom usually gets framed in a few predictable ways. Political rights, the ability to speak, to vote, to move around. Or it gets turned into a consumer dream. A whole buffet of options, as if choosing between brands and lifestyles is the same thing as liberation. And then there's the third definition that people don't always say out loud, but live by every day. Freedom is doing whatever I want, whenever I want, with no one telling me no.
But what happens if that definition is too shallow to describe the human condition? What happens if you can have political rights and still be psychologically trapped? What happens if you can buy whatever you want and still be spiritually owned by fear, addiction, validation, and propaganda? If you dig beneath modern conditioning and listen to older spiritual lineages, you find a much more disruptive definition. In the ancient Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, and in multiple streams of esoteric wisdom, freedom is not primarily about external permission. It's about inner sovereignty. It's liberation of the soul from manipulation, both from outside forces and from the inner prison of the ego.
So today, we're talking about what I'm calling going beyond the matrix of the ego. And we're looking at it through two lenses that interestingly converge. The Ethiopian Bible, including books many Western Christians never read, and the esoteric traditions that focus on awakening consciousness through direct inner knowledge of the divine.
Let's start with the Ethiopian tradition, because to understand why it's so unique, you have to understand its canon. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserves an 81-book Bible. It's often described as one of the oldest and most complete scriptural collections still in continuous use, and it includes texts that were either excluded, removed, or never adopted in the European church tradition. Two of the most famous are the Book of Enoch, known in Ethiopian tradition as Metzhaf Hinnock, and the Book of Jubilees. Now, in a lot of mainstream Western theology, the human problem gets reduced to something like this: people break moral rules, people sin, people need forgiveness. And yes, morality matters. But if that's the whole picture, then freedom becomes basically legal. You're guilty, you get acquitted, and now you're free.
But in the Ethiopian canon, especially in 1 Enoch, the human predicament is described on a much bigger canvas. It's not only personal wrongdoing. It's a story that includes cosmic intrusion, systemic corruption, and spiritual conditioning. Enoch speaks about entities called the Watchers, fallen angelic beings who descend, disrupt the order of creation, and entangle humanity, not just with physical domination, but with knowledge and technologies that distort the soul. And the list is striking. The Watchers introduce things like weapon making, vanity and obsessive self-image, certain forms of astrology, and sorcery. Basically, tools and systems that can be used to control perception and behavior. When you zoom out, it reads less like a fantasy tale and more like a diagnosis of civilization's darker operating system. It's the idea that there is an original matrix of control built not only on chains, but on the manipulation of consciousness.
So what's the Ethiopian insight about freedom in that context? Freedom isn't just political independence. It's not just no one is stopping me. Freedom becomes spiritual warfare. It becomes decolonization at the level of the mind and soul. It is the breaking of invisible mechanisms that keep human beings forgetful of their divine origin. In that framework, liberation means shattering synthetic illusions, greed, obsession, the glorification of violence, the mentalities that turn life into competition and domination. It means returning to direct alignment with the Creator, with Zyabur, without the constant interference of false narratives and corrupted desires. Now, let's pivot to the other lens, esoteric wisdom. And when I say esoteric, I'm talking about streams like Christian Gnosticism, Hermetic teachings, and mystical Christian traditions that focus on transformation of consciousness. What's fascinating is that many of these traditions diagnose the human condition in a way that mirrors what we just talked about, only they emphasize the interior realm.
A common theme in these esoteric systems is that the world we experience can be governed, at least in part, by lower or fragmented forces. You might hear terms like the demiurge, archons, or archontic energies. Whatever language you use, the concept points to the same field. Consciousness shaped by fear, control, separation, and the ego's obsession with domination.
In that view, the average person isn't truly awake. They're functioning, sure. They're working, making money, scrolling, reacting. But spiritually speaking, they're like a sleepwalker. They move through life driven by survival impulses, inherited trauma, social programming, and the need to be approved of. And if that's you, if you're being pushed from the inside by fear and pulled from the outside by propaganda, then the question comes back again, are you free or merely busy?
Esoteric teachings often draw a contrast between what looks like freedom and what actually is freedom. False freedom, the ego version, is fueled by external desire. I want, I need, I must have. It's dependent on social validation, on being seen the right way. It operates in fear, in scarcity, in survival mode. And it fragments you, one personality for work, a different one online, another one at home, another one when you're alone.
True freedom, from the esoteric side, has a totally different flavor. It's not frantic. It's rooted in stillness. It's based on self-sovereignty rather than applause. It moves from love rather than fear. And instead of fragmentation, it aims at unified consciousness and inner wholeness. And how do you get there? This is where the word gnosis matters. Gnosis means direct knowing, not secondhand belief. Not repeating something because your community told you it was true. Gnosis is experiential knowledge of the divine within you.
And if you really take that seriously, it changes everything. Because it says your core identity is not your ego, not your job title, not your race, not your achievements, and not your fears. Those may be real parts of your human experience, but they're not the deepest truth of who you are. At the deepest level, you are a spark of the divine, temporarily living a human life.
This is why some traditions connect freedom to theosis, becoming unified with divine nature, participating in divine life. And when that realization lands, the illusion of separation begins to collapse. The kingdom of heaven becomes less like a distant destination and more like an inner reality. And once you're not terrified of losing external things, external systems lose their ability to control you. So now let's bring these two lenses together. Ethiopian scripture, especially the Enochian worldview, gives you a macrocosmic picture, there are forces, systems, and patterns that manipulate humanity. Esoteric wisdom gives you a microcosmic picture. The human being can be hijacked internally by ego, fear, and false identity. Put them together, and a definition of true freedom comes into focus.
True freedom is spiritual sovereignty. It's the capacity to govern your own consciousness, your thoughts, your emotions, your attention, your energy, without constantly being commandeered by media panic, systemic propaganda, or archetypal manipulation.
True freedom is mastery over the lower self. Not in a self-hating way, not in a deny your humanity way, but in a disciplined way. It's getting free from compulsions, addictions, knee-jerk reactions, and that exhausting hunger for validation.
And true freedom is alignment, not lawlessness. This part matters because a lot of people confuse freedom with chaos. They think freedom means no restraint, no responsibility. But these older teachings don't define freedom as doing whatever you want. They define it as aligning your personal will with cosmic order, what some traditions call divine righteousness, and what the ancient Egyptian tradition calls ma'at, the principle of truth and right order.
So freedom becomes a movement from ego-driven survival into spirit-led authority. Not domination over others, authority over yourself. Now, if we take these ideas and look at America, the contrast is sharp. America was founded on a vision of liberty, but over time that idea has been thinned out and commercialized. Now freedom often looks like hyper-individualism. It looks like consumption. It looks like I can do what I want even if it harms everyone around me.
And this is where we have to tell the truth. A lot of what gets marketed as freedom is really just a gilded cage. People can boast about rights and still be drowning in anxiety. People can have endless entertainment and still feel spiritually empty. People can be legally unchained and yet psychically enslaved by algorithms that shape their attention, by debt that shapes their choices, by monopolies that shape their options, by tribal politics that shapes their identity through rage.
So what do these ancient streams say back to a society like that? They offer a correction that's hard to hear. You cannot build a free society out of enslaved minds. If freedom is only external, it will always be vulnerable. If the inner world is colonized, the outer world will eventually reflect it.
And this is where the Ethiopian emphasis on community and covenant becomes important. Freedom isn't only an individual project. It's relational. It recognizes interconnected destiny. If your liberty depends on someone else's oppression, that liberty is counterfeit. If your comfort requires the neglect of the collective, then you're not living freedom. You're living separation.
So if America wants real liberty, the shift has to happen from the inside out. It has to involve discipline, restraint, and spiritual maturity, the dismantling of the inner greed and fear that keeps reproducing outer tyranny in new forms. Now let's talk about the modern Christian church, because if any institution should be equipped to talk about liberation, it should be the church. But in many Western contexts, the church has drifted far away from its mystical and liberatory roots. In a lot of mainstream forms, especially the consumerized, hyper-politicized versions, Christianity has been reduced to sterile dogma or what some people call moralistic therapeutic deism. Be a decent person, feel better about yourself, and believe the correct doctrines. Or it becomes an organization chasing corporate growth metrics and influence. Compare that to the Ethiopian and esoteric heritage. In the modern Western model, faith can become legalistic. You mentally agree to a list of statements. In the mystical model, the center is experiential. You encounter the living Christ inwardly. In the modern model, salvation can become transactional. Say the prayer, avoid hell later. In the mystical model, salvation is transformational. Awaken now, embody divine life now, become a new kind of human being.
And there's another contrast that people avoid: cosmology. Many Western churches operate with a sanitized universe. The spiritual world is simplified to personal temptation and private morality. But texts like 1 Enoch and esoteric frameworks as well talk about systemic and unseen forces, structures of oppression that are not only social, but spiritual and psychological. Whether you interpret that literally, symbolically, or both, the point is the same. The battle isn't only about bad behavior. It's about bondage of consciousness. So, what would it look like for the church to move beyond a transactional model and recover its depth?
First, it would mean reclaiming the mystical dimension. Not treating mysticism as dangerous or strange, but as part of the inheritance. Practices like meditation, silence, deep prayer, and real contemplation, ways of making space for direct experience of God, would become normal again, not fringe. Second, it would mean exposing systemic oppression with prophetic clarity. If you follow the blueprint of Enoch, you have to be willing to name modern watchers. Not as a spooky metaphor, but as a way to describe forces that keep people trapped: the military-industrial machine, predatory financial systems, the architecture of racial and economic subjugation, and the manipulation of attention through media ecosystems designed for profit, not truth. Third, it would require a shift from belief to being. Christianity would have to stop functioning like a social club or a political voting bloc and return to what it originally called itself: the way. Not a brand. A path. A lived process of ego death and spiritual resurrection, where freedom is found through surrendering the false self, not through trying to dominate everyone else.
And that brings us to one of the most intense takeaways of all. No government, no economy, and no external oppressor can hand you true freedom. And on the other side of that, none of them can ultimately steal it either. Freedom is an inside-out revolution. It begins when you unplug your mind from the collective field of fear and reclaim your birthright as a sovereign expression of the divine.
Now, there's a harder layer we have to address, because it's not enough to critique society out there. Institutions that claim to represent God can become the very matrix they were meant to dismantle. And here's the uncomfortable truth: an institution founded to spread radical love has often played the role of gatekeeper and exclusion. When the church discriminates against women, against minorities, against the poor, the sick, and LGBTQ+ communities, it's not just failing morally. It's vibrating at the same frequency as the control system. It becomes the matrix.
And that brings me to a paradox that's especially important in conversations about liberation: the Black church. Historically, the Black church has been an engine of freedom, civil rights, dignity, survival, community organization, social justice. That legacy is real. But the Black church, like any human institution, is not immune to ego traps.
There's a subtle danger that shows up when oppressed people fight oppression for generations. Sometimes the psychology of the oppressor gets internalized. It's not because people are evil. It's because survival strategies can calcify into power structures. In modern expressions, that can show up as pastoral narcissism, celebrity pastor culture where the pulpit becomes a throne. It can show up as rigid patriarchy that silences women even though women often carry the community. It can show up as defensive legalism that marginalizes LGBTQ+ people.
A double outrage also happens when LGBT and women pastoral narcissism outshines the ones they call evil. And when that happens, something tragic occurs. The institution that once fought Pharaoh starts acting like Pharaoh in certain rooms.
So what do these Ethiopian and esoteric keys suggest as a way forward? They point toward structural ego death, not just personal self-improvement, but deep transformation of how power is held. Let's break this down into a few major knots the church has to untie.
First is dismantling the hierarchy of the ego, especially in the form of patriarchy and heterosexism. Esoteric wisdom teaches that the ego loves separation. It loves labeling. It loves ranking. It needs a pecking order so it can feel secure. And across Western church history, that ego need has often been given a holy costume. Women placed under men, LGBTQ+ people treated as threats, and literalist interpretations of translated texts used like weapons.
But the esoteric correction is unity consciousness. If you truly recognize gnosis, direct awareness of the divine spark in each person, then discrimination becomes theologically impossible. Because you can't look at another human being and reduce them to a category without also denying the presence of God in them.
Many mystical and early Christian streams speak of the soul, the pneuma, as beyond gender. The divine breath is not confined to a binary. And when the church's focus becomes theosis, participation in divine nature, the obsession with policing bodies and roles begins to dissolve. to marginalize a woman or an LGBTQ plus person. In that frame is to look at divine architecture and declare it defective. That is religious ego at its peak.
Second is breaking the matrix of classism, especially how the church treats the poor and the sick. In modern Western Christianity, there's been a deep fusion with American capitalism. And out of that fusion came a particularly potent distortion, the prosperity gospel, the idea that wealth proves God's favor and sickness or poverty proves spiritual failure.
But the Ethiopian biblical lens turns that upside down. In the Enochian worldview, the obsession with mining wealth for vanity, hoarding gold, building systems of domination, this is exactly the kind of corruption associated with the fallen forces. That means chronic poverty and widespread sickness aren't proof that individuals are inferior. They're symptoms of a broken social and spiritual order.
So the church's role can't be reduced to charity as a public relations strategy. The call is deeper: divest from corporate ego, stop worshiping building funds and political access, and redistribute energy and resources toward the margins, not treating suffering people as projects, but as the face of Christ among us. Third is healing what I'll call the oppressed-turned-oppressor trap, specifically in the black church context, but honestly it can happen anywhere. Because the black church had to function as a fortress against white supremacy, the pastor often became a protective, commanding figure. In survival mode, strong centralized leadership can keep people alive. But over decades, what protected can also control.
Esoteric practice uses a term for the inward work required here: shadow work. It means confronting what we don't want to see in ourselves, especially the ways we've mirrored what we say we hate. It means telling the truth about how ego hides inside holy language. Here's the internal mirror that cannot be avoided. You cannot preach Exodus on Sunday, claim freedom from Pharaoh, and then turn around and behave like Pharaoh toward women, youth, and LGBTQ plus people on Monday.
So dismantling pastoral authoritarianism becomes essential. No human intermediary holds the keys to your soul. Pastors are not meant to be spiritual dictators. They're meant to be facilitators, guides, servants, people who help others grow into their own direct connection with God.
And then there's the rebalancing of spiritual power, including reclaiming the feminine dimension of the divine. In many Black church communities, Black women supply the labor, financing, and prayer backbone, yet leadership remains overwhelmingly patriarchal. An esoteric and Ethiopian-aware theology that recognizes divine wisdom, Sophia, the Holy Spirit as wisdom, forces the question: if the Spirit is honored in speech, why is the feminine suppressed in structure?
So where does all this leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads that can't be solved by public relations campaigns or surface-level diversity trainings. If the American church, black, white, and everything in between, wants to survive the spiritual awakening happening outside its walls, it needs more than new slogans. It needs a metaphysical reset. It needs to stop reading scripture through the lens of empire and start reading through ancient liberatory and mystical frameworks. It needs to re-enter the depth that was always there, the battle for consciousness, the call to inner transformation, the demand for justice that isn't performative but structural.
And it needs to ask a question that sounds like death to institutions, but life to the soul. Are we willing to let our old structures die so that the true spirit of cosmic freedom can rise again?
Because the whole message, when you strip it down, is this: freedom isn't the permission to indulge every impulse. It's the power to refuse manipulation. It's the capacity to love without fear. It's the ability to live aligned with divine order. It's sovereignty of the soul. And if that's true, then the real revolution doesn't start in a voting booth or a marketplace. It starts in the mind. It starts in the heart. It starts when you stop outsourcing your spiritual authority, stop feeding the ego matrix, and remember what these old lineages have been saying all along: you were made for something freer than survival.
Ooh, yeah. On a signal of grace so true, there's a fellowship waiting for you. Christ Followers Network on Bullet in Flight Radio. Oh, on Bullet in Flight Radio.
If you've ever felt trapped in that endless top 40 loop, you know the feeling. Same songs, same sounds, same safe choices. Like the world hit repeat and lost the button to try something new. Today, I want to introduce you to a crew that's built to do the exact opposite. Change the station entirely. Bullet End Flight is based right in the heart of the 505, Albuquerque, where the green chili runs hot and the creative energy somehow runs even hotter. And when I say Bullet End Flight, I'm not talking about one single project or one single vibe. Think of it more like a parent company to a whole family of artistic misfits. People who don't fit neatly into the usual boxes, and honestly, don't want to. At the center of everything is a mission that's pretty simple to say, but not always easy to pull off. Elevate the voices that usually get talked over. The artists who get labeled too niche, or too different, or that weird one, too Albuquerque. Whatever that's supposed to mean. If you've ever heard something like that about your work, this is your invitation to pull up a chair. Because that's not a deal breaker here. That's the whole point. Bullet End Flight is built around inclusivity, creative community building, and giving underrepresented artists the megaphone they deserve. Not as a trend, not as a marketing angle, but as the core identity. It's a response to a creative world that can feel gated, filtered, and overly polished, where the most interesting voices get told to tone it down so they can be easier to sell. And here's where it gets fun. Bullet End Flight doesn't believe in staying in one lane. Because why would you? Why drive a sedan when you could take a spaceship? The whole approach is more like, what does human expression look like across every format? And then going after all of it. Let's start with music, because that's a major part of the DNA. The mindset here isn't pick a genre and stay in it. It's more like, what's the vibe and does it hit? That can mean the spiritual charge of gospel, the late-night pulse of house music, the smooth storytelling and emotion of R&B, or even that classic country charm where life falls apart but somehow the drink is still cold. It's not about fitting into a category. It's about making something that feels alive. But it doesn't stop at music. There's a strong dedication to the spoken word too. Podcasts that get into the real stuff, not just surface-level chatter, and poetry that doesn't play nice. The kind that lands heavy, the kind that says what people avoid saying, the kind that reminds you words can still be dangerous in the best way. Then there's film and TV writing. Getting into scripts that actually have a heartbeat. Not another recycled reboot of a reboot. Not something designed by committee to offend the fewest people possible. The focus is on stories with soul. Stories with perspective. Stories that sound like they came from real lives, in real places, with real edges. And of course, the stage. Because there is nothing like live performance. It's unpredictable, it's electric, and yeah, anything can happen. And usually does. The stage is where art stops being an idea and becomes a moment, right in front of people who can feel it in real time. So why would an artist want to plug into something like this? Because being a starving artist has been romanticized for way too long, and it doesn't need to be the default. And being a lonely artist, trying to build everything by yourself, with no village, no network, no support, that's even worse. Bullet End Flight is about building that village on purpose. The goal is to take the talent that's been brewing in the Southwest, often overlooked, often underestimated, and project it outward. Not in a please notice us kind of way, but in a we're already here, and we're bringing the whole sound with us kind of way. Bullet End Flight positions itself as a launch pad, a safety net, and the hype you didn't realize you were missing. And let's be honest, a lot of people are tired of gatekeepers. Tired of needing permission. Tired of feeling like they have to sand down everything interesting about their work to be taken seriously. If that's you, this is a space that's built for finding your tribe. People who want loud, weird, real art, and who aren't afraid to make it together. If you want to get in the mix, Deombase is https://just-dominic. And if you want the visuals, you can find the YouTube channel at Just Dominic Music. Bullet End Flight Music, LLC is the company behind it all. And the invitation is open. Check out what's being built, listen to what's coming out, and if you're ready to change the station, this is a good place to start.
Bullet End Flight.
Your story, our station.